We would, yes, get started. Okay, so we've come towards the fag end of our sustainability conclave, this being our second last session. And we started with talking about decarb, inclusivity, circularity, agri waste, and now we come to the crux, the base of all things textiles, which is really materials and materials like cotton, which really form the base of most of the clothing that we wear today. Over the years, we've seen cotton cultivation go through tremendous changes, climate risks, livelihood concerns coming up. And in all of this, we've now started to focus more about on organic, regen agriculture. But while we do all of these transitions at a farmer level, how do we really set the pricing for these commodities? It is not conventional cotton, so conventional practices of pricing don't really work. So, what are the innovative models of pricing, or how do we really decide the fair pricing of these commodities? This is what the session is about, and a very critical topic of discussion as we get into newer forms of agriculture as well going forward in the country, and newer materials as well as we go forward. So I would like to call upon our esteemed panelists for this session. Mr. Jagjit Kandal, Country Director, IDH. Mr. Naveen Aga Khan, Rural Support Program. Mr. Amit Shah from Amit Group. And we have, of course, Danik from Bestseller to bring the brand's perspective. And the moderator for the day, Sucharu, Country Director, Oka. Over to you, Sucharu.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for your alertness at this post-lunch session. Um, so, as the industry is being pushed towards looking for more sustainable solutions and sustainable and circular and regenerative organic fibers, these are important because, as we know, fiber itself constitutes nearly 60% of the of the footprint, carbon footprint of the final garment. Now, for this reason, we see brands trying to diversify sourcing to include these materials in their sourcing. They're also being looked at to reduce the environmental impact and respond to the growing climate and regulatory pressures that the industry is facing. Now, beneath all of this momentum from the demand side that we see existing, there are market systems which are actually operating for conventional fibers. But these systems also are sitting in actually, are these fibers that we are talking about today, are they actually the existing systems designed to reward people taking the greatest risks to produce them, is one of the questions that this panel is questioning. Now, today, organic and regenerative cotton, like I said, are largely operating within the conventional systems. Premiums, as we understand the word, is it really a premium? Is it fair to say the word premium? Are they to be called as incentives for promoting these fibers? Transition costs remain very insufficiently recognized. With farmers frequently taking risks which are not fully reflective in the prices that they receive. Now, at the same time, when we talk about the supply side, we'll talk about on the certification systems. While they help to create trust, traceability, and market differentiation, yet farmers often bear the compliance costs and requirements without always seeing the proportionate economic returns come to them. So this discussion is not simply about premiums, incentives, or procurements. It's about whether, as an industry, can we look at sourcing models that are equitable, which are commercially viable, resilient, and whether people anchoring the entire system are generally sharing in the risks. So I'm very pleased to have this esteemed panel. With that, we'll get into picking on their brains and their experiences as we explore this topic. So hi, am I audible? Yeah, thank you. So I'm going to start with a very basic question for all of you all, and starting with Danny Q, saying, and for all of our panelists, just to set context, what actually determines the price of sustainable and organic cotton today? What do you think are the key levers, as from your perspective?
Well, cotton is a global commodity, right? So prices are defined by supply and demand. And I think adding a certification to that means that we're creating access to a certified product. But it doesn't necessarily mean that then that certified product is also carrying that price premium. And I think that is also where it goes wrong in global markets, because we are not able to fight a system that is based on supply and demand. I mean, global cotton commodity prices will always vary. They will go up and they will go down, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So for me, a fair organic premium should be a reward to farmers for doing something different. So I think we should look at the two things separately. That's my point.
Thanks, Tanik. Naveen, from your viewpoint of working with the farming communities on the ground, what do you think is your perspective ground up?
Yeah, so if I speak about farmers, farmers are very much driven by what is happening with the cotton on the day they want to sell it. So basically the day they harvest, if you look at Indian conditions, almost 90% of the farmers are small and marginal farmers. And they do not have any capacity to hold cotton. Even if they know the cotton prices might go up in future, they cannot hold it. So what they do is, as soon as harvesting is done, they want to sell it. And they compare the prices, what they are being offered by local traders or in the local APMCs. And that is their benchmark. They are not looking at any contracts, they are not looking at any spot prices, anything, or international export, import, whatever is happening. They are, I think, devoid of all these realities. They are looking at what is being offered by the local traders. And then they are benchmarking that with what they should expect. Of course, they are adding the additional labor they are putting for or the region farming or cotton or organic farming. And they are thinking in their mind that there has to be something which is plus than what is being offered at the local APMC or by the local traders. So that is, I think, very simple for farmers. They look at local conditions rather than MSP or the spot price or any other prices.
So it's interesting, we heard Danik say about global expectation from organic cotton, a certification system that's backing the procurement. We heard Naveen talk about how at the very ground farm level, it is literally the mandi price or the price which is prevailing in a local context being the key factor, and something on top as an incentive to grow that organic cotton. But I'm going to ask the same of Amit. He's balancing the act of procuring the cotton from the market, from the supply chain, from his farm programs, and yet supply to brands. How do you bridge this gap now?
I'm not sure if we always are able to bridge that gap. I think it's a very, very fair point. At a very macro level, you have these global dynamics that eventually, whether I like or not, the fact is that today, for example, Turkish organic cotton is flowing into this country in large quantums. And that shows the fact that the world thinks that that cotton is better priced than what India has to offer at this point. At the same time, I agree with Naveen that eventually a farmer will look at two things. One is cost, and second is, of course, what are the alternatives available in the market. If the MSP is higher, then they would love to give it to the government, or they'll do it. I think as the supply chain, if I can speak for whether they are traders, the balancing act is played, A, by taking a certain amount of risk, where either you're buying something and hoping that the prices will eventually match, or not buying something and hoping that prices will come down. You do have certain mechanisms with you, hedging mechanisms, which in India are still not as prevalent as they are probably globally. which I think are coming in. You still don't have that kind of volumes in these markets where you can hedge your product and try and get advantage. So it's a tough game. And sorry if this sounds like a no answer, but the fact is that it's so dynamic that it really depends. If you were to look at pricing of cotton just a month or 2 months ago and what it is today, so many things are changing, and that's just making it more difficult. So no one formula, but it's very dynamic for the supply chain as we go along, and what each one's perception is. And often it leads to large losses and sometimes to good profits.
So it's very interesting. So one side we've got brand partners who are willing to commit long-term to the country for contracts which are, placed ahead of time. But at the end, you're saying, we are hearing from Naveen that, and from Amit, that in the end, it is price dynamics on the day of procurement, which is sounds very transactional rather than consistency in pricing. So I'm very curious, and I'll come back to Danik on this. How do brands absorb this kind of volatility, and what's their appetite to absorb this, and how do you navigate this internally? How do you manage to secure contracts year on year to accept and kind of work with this volatility?
Well, it doesn't go without the usual humps and bumps. I think we just came out of a very challenging season, so for everyone probably. What is key for us is, as I just said, right, that we are able to separate two things. One is a global commodity price, and the other thing is securing volumes in organic cotton, especially from India, from the partners that we are working with, and then separating those two costs. So for us, that's really the only way to make this fly and to make this scale. Because if we want to secure that those farmers actually are rewarded properly for the efforts they put in, then that premium needs to go to the farmer directly. Then that premium should not be a fluctuating element that moves with those global market prices when it comes to conventional prices, right? So what we prefer is really that we are able to separate the two, and that we move with the supply chain on conventional level, and that premiums are decoupled there.
Thanks for sharing that. I think it's a very clever perspective you bring in. I want to get in Jagjit's view here as a veteran in the cotton industry and with IDH working on sourcing systems and on landscape solutions. What current pricing architectures are really operate in practice, and where are the biggest disconnects between sustainable cotton costs to produce them and what farmers are ultimately paid?
Thanks, Charu. I think part of the answer has already been put out by Danik and Naveen, right? So I think the challenge is that pricing at the brand side of it is global, right? And that's not going to change. They are in a marketplace where they're competing with other brands, and they can't, even if they want to, many of them can't pay a higher price, right? And there are brands who are wanting to share value with with the whole supply chain, but their hands are tied because they still have to fight in the marketplace with brands who are not doing that. And as Naveen said, at the farmer level, it's a very different story. He doesn't really know about global markets. He's more bothered about what's happening locally, right? And there is no connect there. That's reality. There is a big disconnect, and it really starts at because the guy who's buying from the farmer is the ginner, right? The guy who's selling to the brands is the spinner. And those two are not connected. And somewhere we need to make that happen. So to me, it's a bigger challenge on what's the transparency in the value chain. I think that's not there at this stage, right? And I'll give you an example from, we've done this in coffee. In the coffee world, we've actually done a study which gives you exactly how the value is shared right from the consumer level, brand, the customer price, right up till the farm gate, right? And we did find a lot of inequalities. It hasn't solved the problem, but it's given the visibility to everybody in that value chain as to what part of the profits who's keeping. And that's now starting a discussion of how do you share value equitably as much as possible in that value chain. And I think that's something I would encourage all value chains to actually do this, right? And look at it the other way around. Why do we have all these structures of fair pricing and stuff like that? Why even the thing of premiums, right? Why is sustainability needed? Everybody says the consumers want it, that's why the brands are going around it. But the consumer doesn't want to pay a price for it. He wants the sustainability at no extra cost. And I do believe that it's also the brand's perspective that they have to get the consumer to pay that extra price to be able to share it down the value.
So you raised two very important points, which I think I'm going to ask this panel to also talk about. You talked about value share across the supply chain. You talked about coffee, that there is an example there, that there is a visibility because of transparency for the value chain share. I'm going to talk to our panelists about it, and get their view as to what are the risks at each point that they're carrying versus who's really carrying the risk of organic cotton in the system the way it's prevalent today. I can start with you, Danik, if you want to talk about that.
Yeah, maybe I know too much by now. But no, I definitely feel farmers carry a lot of risk. But I think the risk from a brand perspective is much more related to access to stable supply. Of course, there is the greenwashing risk, right? There is regulations coming up. If we are not able to comply and prove that what we source is actually true organic, that it's genuine, that it has the right levels of integrity, that it's flowing into our supply chain as it should, I think for us engaging so much on the ground really is risk mitigation. I mean, we have targets set to source an X percentage of organic cotton. I mean, if we don't reach that target, then we also look stupid, And if we want to reach that, we've set those targets because we want to reduce our emissions. So all of it is connected to that bigger plan in terms of, transparency, traceability, getting data, measure outcomes, not only at farm level, but then also who is the ginner, who is the spinner, who is the fabric wheel, everything needs to come together. And I think, that's why we need partners in the full value chain to simply mitigate that risk and to be able to become future-proof and meet all of those upcoming regulations. Yeah.
Thanks, Danik. Naveen, from a farming community and on the farm, we know that the farmer is he's the one who's growing the organic crop. Do you want to talk to us about his daily household as well as challenges while he's growing the crop and what it takes to bring it to market?
Yeah. So when a farmer shifts from conventional way of farming to more regen or organic or even BCI way of doing cotton, I think lot of changes they need to adopt at the farm level. So let us say in organic, first risk farmer is taking is from BT they are shifting to non-GMO. That itself is a risk because we know that the quality of non-GMO seeds as of now is extremely questionable. So some years there is good production, but other years there are fluctuations. So first risk is coming from seed itself. But then they are shifting also from chemical synthetic inputs to organic inputs. So they have to put in additional efforts to prepare bio inputs from local resources. That is additional effort. Then we are asking farmers to go from monocropping to diverse way of cropping. So multi-cropping systems. That is also a risk. But it is also one of the way of risk mitigation. So in a way, farmers are taking a lot of risk when they shift because there is no predictability of outcome in terms of production as well as pricing. If I 100% know that by adopting these practices, productivity is going to be increased and I am going to get better prices, then there is no risk. But both of these things, both these variables are not, both of these are variables. These are not fixed. So I think there is a risk for farmers. But I also see because of this kind of things, sometimes farmers are also losing their face. Like if they sign contracts with brands or the supply chain partners, and if they are not able to meet those commitments, I have practically seen that sometimes farmer leaders also feel bad. It's not that they are not feeling bad of not meeting the commitments. So that is also a risk that you are signing a contract but not able to supply to the sustainable value chain. Finally, one point I would like to highlight is organizations like us, we are also taking risk. Because finally for farmers, my field team is the face. They do not know who is the ultimate brand or who are the spinners or who are the supply chain partners. Day in and day out, they see my field workers in the field. So if our field team is promising farmers that if you adopt these practices, you are going to get premium price or better price or incentive, and if that is not met, actually we are losing our face there. And lot of questions are being asked to our field teams that despite adopting all the practices, why are we not paid the incentive which we were promised? So I think everyone is taking risk in the game. Thank you.
Samit, as the person again in between, besides the risks that we heard Naveen say at the farm level and Danik at the brand level, you yourselves will, as the partner in between, what are your risks and how do you look at this entire landscape of risk mitigation?
So of course, but let me also first say that I think risk has to also be weighed in terms of the resilience of the risk taker. And from that perspective, I think one has to admit hands down that the farmer carries the highest risk. Whether it's sustainable or conventional cotton, at least in a context like India, and I know my large farm holders hate it when I try to differentiate because they believe they carry as much risk. But the fact is, for a small holding farmer, this is existential. One bad year could mean an entire life gone. And so that I don't think can be compared with any of the risks that we take in the supply chain purely because of our resilience capacity, which would be better. To answer your question, I think after farming, the ginner takes the risk that he has to buy or she has to buy a lot of cotton in a short amount of time. And if there aren't orders, through the year, so everybody thinks that, oh, there are orders. I tell you, last April to October in 25, nobody sold a kilo of organic. 6 months went totally dry. And so there are patches like that as well. And then there are patches like the last 3-4 months where everybody is buying. So that risk of carrying that cotton physically, there are risks of damage, fire, so much, but also working capital block. And I think thereon the risk is quite, well, first of all, it also the players are very organized after that, from the ginning after. So there are risks, but they also buy a lot of just-in-time inventory. So at least that part of it is not there. Having said that, of course, not getting supplies on time, as Danik said, what applies to the brand applies to the whole supply chain. You make plans, you think this is how it's going to go, and then if you don't end up getting, for whatever reason, sure, plans go completely awry. And sometimes that can mean huge financial losses, reputational losses, which I think is even more than financial loss. Are the kind of risks we all run. Of course, pales in comparison to what the farmer takes, but nonetheless.
So, Jagji, drawing on your experience, Are there financing, insurance or other risk hedging mechanisms which are available which can help address these challenges on the ground?
There are at farmer levels, but what we've seen is crop insurance has really failed. What has worked to a large extent, and I think it's still not prevalent enough in India, is conditions-based insurance, which is, let's say you define what are the weather patterns for cotton growing, and in those months if the rainfall is less or if it's higher than the preset conditions, then the farmer will straight away get insurance. I think that really works because, and to the point which Amit was making, it helps the resilience of the farmer. It sort of almost says that if your weather is normal, you'll get a normal crop, but anything outside of that, you will get impacted. And the good thing about this insurance is it doesn't matter whether it gets impacted or not. He will get the insurance money if for 3 days, if the weather goes up or down. So it's got temperature, it's got rainfall, which are the critical parts to it. Unfortunately, this has not really been rolled out well enough. And I think this is a call for the insurance companies to go out there and explain it to the farmer, because the cost of it is not very high. It normally is around 3 to 4% of his annual turnover, but it does give him a very solid backup plan whenever there is a problem.
Thanks for that. I'm going to quickly ask Naveen as to how on the practically at the ground level do we see farmers taking risk hedging mechanisms? Are they aware, or are they aware of the the risk mechanisms to mitigate? Or Jagjit, you want to go
Just
ahead?
quickly, I just add, right? So as an example, during COVID, this worked. A lot of our farmers, we got them insured for COVID, and it really benefited them, right? But that time it was government driven. Because of that, the COVID insurance was put out for farmers in a big way, right? People didn't have a choice. But it does work, and I think Naveen will probably be able to say how it's practically being implemented now.
Yeah, so from risk mitigation perspective, insurance is of course very useful. We have practically seen that farmers do receive incentive against losses. Not incentive, means compensation against losses, and that really helps. But then I would focus more on sustainable way of farming. Itself has a lot of mitigation measures. Let us say when we ask farmers to go for multi-cropping system rather than just monocropping, it is a risk mitigation, because if one crop fails, you still have option to get your livelihoods or income from rest of the crops. That is one. I think then second is, let us say, we have practically seen farmers going for, let us say, drip irrigation systems in cotton. That really reduces risk against monsoon. So if there is less rainfall or less underground water available in a particular year, then drip irrigation systems have really given really good results. So it's like real good risk mitigation measures. But on market side, what has worked is, in the past there were really success when finally the cotton from farmers, our idea is that it will flow through farmers collectives, which are called FPOs or cooperatives. If FPOs are given some risk-free capital, which is with them, which can be used for procuring cotton from the farmers, because FPOs can store if their capacity is built. They can hedge against market volatility. But individual farmers will not be able to hedge against the market risk. So in the past, we tried it out with a couple of farmer producers organizations, where the supply chain partners were willing to give funds in advance to these FPOs, and that really worked, because then farmers need not to worry about when to sell, what rate, because FPO is doing on behalf of them. So that is also a way to ensure that there is some visibility of supplying into supply chain through strengthening FPOs.
Thanks, Naveen, and thank you, panelists, for sharing your views on risks and values and sharing the values across the supply chain. I think with all the vagaries that we've heard and the variances that we've heard, I think the word that you used, Amit, resilience, I think that what comes foremost to my mind as we move forward into this discussion. I would like to talk about if the current system's not really rewarding the sustainable production as well as sustainable fibers, what would need to change for a fair pricing to become the norm rather than the exception, and or models which are working out of normal methodologies to make sourcing work? We've heard concerns about inconsistencies in pricing. We've heard about certification costs as well, which were a key challenge. The need for credible supplies. We've heard about the persistent challenges about transition risks that you also shared. The question is now what needs to structurally change? And I'm going to ask each of you in this order, starting with you, Danik, what are your views on this? What do you think needs to structurally change to have scalable systems around fibers such as organic cotton and other sustainable fibers?
Yeah. It's a big question. No, I think, for us, it really means that we're looking long term, right? Because I think going long term, that is actually reducing that uncertainty. So if we have transparency, if we have traceability, if we have a predictable premium, if we have a proper mechanism in place to pay those out, if farmers become more productive, more climate resilient, if we then are also able to stabilize that competitiveness across the world, I think that is key as well. Then I hope that 5 years from now we actually have a system in place, a system that is able to pay out those premiums and to reward those farmers separately from a global commodity price. And I think that is really what we need. Yeah.
Well said. Thanks for sharing that vision. Naveen, from your point, what do you think, what structural changes implemented on ground is going to help scale the entire sustainable fiber market?
So I think Danik has said it all. I will put it into rules. So let us say if farmers are adopting good practices years after years, can we guarantee them that you will get incentive irrespective of market conditions? So if they are going for, let us say, bioinputs, crop diversity, basically regen way of producing cotton, then there has to be some predictability at the farm level that farmers are going to get incentive irrespective of the market conditions outside, because they have fulfilled their role in a way. Whatever they were asked to do at the farm level, if they have done everything, I think they are entitled to get the incentive. So if we can create a predictable model for farmers, where the incentive flows to farmers based on certain practices and outcomes they are achieving at the farm level. And I would also add that not just the certificate. Certificate is just a piece of paper. Actual outcome at the farm level, if farmer is able to achieve, they should be incentivized. I think it can be very well done. Brands are very much willing to incentivize. I think we have to just find out mechanisms where farmers can be transferred this incentive. They may finally sell the cotton to traditional market if it is not making any commercial sense for selling it to sustainable supply chains. But still that additional premium will be assured. I think one of the great examples is your own Oka Farm Fund, which you are trying to pilot, where farmers will be incentivized if they follow certain practices, and those practices, if they can demonstrate that they have really done those practices and outcomes are there on the ground. So if there is real improvement in the soil health, if there is real improvement in the water efficiency at the ground level, there is real improvement in the biodiversity at the village level or the farm levels, I think that incentive can flow to them. And I think your common pool of fund is a good example. So we need to further work on these models, basically.
Thanks, Naveen. Amit, in models such as what Naveen spoke about for organic cotton, which are existing currently, how well do they sit within the conventional systems that are currently operating in the market? Is that the core of the challenge? Do you face a challenge when you go out there trying to source cotton and implement these programs? Actually, my larger question is, do we need systems for sustainable organic fibers, and then you have systems for conventional. Do we need changes to current systems to adopt for sustainable organic materials, and or does it need a completely different system?
Yeah, I think I'm going to answer it this way, right? I think systems emanate from mindsets. And to some extent, if this answer may not sound exciting, but some of this is evolution. Mindsets don't change over a few years. I think when I look at younger people, both from the consumer side, from the supplier side, there are different mindsets. Mindsets from the consumer eventually will have to change, where I do think that though many brands believe they don't have the power, a good friend of mine from Levi once said, that eventually the brands do have a lot of power on telling the consumer what they are buying. So for example, just starting with doing away with the word premium and recognizing it as cost. Say, for example, is just a change in mindset. It's a small one, but at the end of the day, the fact that you're paying for a cost incurred by the farmer and not a charitable premium that you're paying on top is a small example of how mindsets. For the supply chain, textile is a very long supply chain. And it's very sad often that we are one of the few supply chains who don't really are not concerned about our raw material, where it comes from, and what should we do about that. You see other supply chains, they are extremely concerned. For us, it's more of a numbers thing. How many tons this year production? What is the global balance sheet? And let's decide our strategy. So that's a mindset that I think we need to give importance to, that eventually we are dependent on that supply for this industry to run. I think at some point we've taken it for granted, that that's always there. India will always remain on top. And if I were now to speak a little bit on India specific,
Please.
I think that's a mindset that needs to change. Honestly, even from a farmer perspective, when I speak to partner farmers, their mindset needs to change. There is a mindset that government will take care of you forever. I don't think that's going to happen, right? At some point, there's a limit to that. I tell farmers at some point, it's better to quit and take other occupations. You are now at 1.5 acre. If I was making a business plan for a 1.5 acre, it's not a great business plan. I'm not saying sell the land, but learn other professions. So I think this mindset change structurally, whether it's conventional or whether it's sustainable, both need to change. As far as sustainable is, and but this is in the long run. In the short run, I think governments have to step in. For example, MSP is one such route, but I think structured very wrongly. Let it be directly to the farmer instead of, it hampering the entire market dynamic. So I think government's role is in that interim while this shift occurs, but mindsets will have to change across consumers, retailers, brands, supply chains, and farmers. And until then, we have to kind of keep pushing through this evolution process. And the government will have to help in between for sure.
So you touched on a very key point on policy and the need for policy intervention, Jagjit. You're very well placed in that arena. Talk to us about what do you see the need for policy intervention, if you want to speak about some where policy has helped, and or any of these interventions for larger landscape evolution, your views on that.
Thanks. I'm going to touch on two things. Firstly, I really want to come back to what you said. What does structurally need to change? And I think that's, to me, a really key one. I think speaking for all farmers, not just cotton, but for any farmer, I think structurally we need to change that the whole business model, pricing model has to start from there, from the farmer, which means that you start with what's his cost of production and everything has to be a cost plus, right? Today there are a number of farmers in our country who are not making their cost of production and are actually, that's what is detrimental. And this has got to connect to businesses, because if the farmer is not viable, your security of supply in the long run is going to be really, really challenged, right? And that's why I think that's the first structural change which I would really like to bring in. And I've spoken about this before. I believe that a farmer must get 50% profit on his cost of production, right? No? But that's a big number, right? He'd be very happy if he got 50% profit.
I think Danik would jump.
No, Janik, what? So, but let me correct that perception, right? At the farmer level, or in any business, the cost of the first raw material, the base raw material, is never more than a couple of percentage points of the retail price. Never.
Decimals.
Exactly, right?
Not even in the
So when you look at that 50% profit to him, it is less than 1%, and we've done these numbers for a number of different crops. It's less than 1% at the brand side of it. So it's not a great,
Yeah.
load on the brand side, but it can definitely make a big change at the farmer side of it. Now, why does he need 50%? Because one has to realize that at a small farmer level, 20% of that is just basically running the family. 20 to 30% is going to go. That's absolutely just the bare minimum living livelihoods for that farmer. Because when we are saying cost of production, that does not take into account the family's livelihoods. The balance 20% odd is for him to be able to invest back into the business. And that's again connected to security of supply. If he doesn't do that, this is where we are landing up with our farms today, where our soils are degraded. We are talking about regenerative agriculture. Why are we talking? Because that reinvestment has just not happened. So for me, I think it's a critical part of how do farmers get at least a 50%. I personally think MSP, or on a policy front, it's not the government's job to be buying stuff. It's absolutely the wrong role for them to do. They need to create ecosystems. They need to create systems which will enable business to happen, right? And look at the simple example on how MSP has gone wrong. Today we are surplus on rice and wheat. Just for one reason, because there is an MSP and government guarantees buying X quantity. Those farmers, they're not bothered about even trying anything else. Diversification is out of their mindset because they know that they can just grow wheat and sell it. Even when and we are now having to export those items. We're sitting on grains in our place and that's getting rotted because for years we've got extra stock, right? So MSP should be a guideline, and that should start from what I was saying. What's the cost of production? I think it is there, but they've not added this 50% part on it. They do add some profit, but it's not this thing. If those become general guidelines, then things will start changing. But coming back to what Danik was also talking about, I think from a structural point of view, no single brand can drive this. So it's really got to be done at industry level. That's the other structural change which has to happen. How do we get businesses to come together and then think of the solution? Today we are expecting in many, many cases, in many, many products, we're expecting a couple of brands to be champions. I don't think that's fair, right? There are always people who stand up and call out, but it also then puts a lot of pressure on them. And if we did that at an industry level, I think the change would come much faster.
So I have a quick question.
Sorry, Suchari, just to
Sorry.
add to that,
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. I think also we need to destigmatize certain things. I think, for example, if I make a statement that a farmer should look at other occupations, I don't mean just leave farming. But for example, his wife, his daughter, we have been training a lot of women to become a secondary income holder because to expect that you will earn your entire livelihood in 2026 from probably 1/10 of the land that your family held many years ago with this increased inflation is sometimes to me a non-starter. As I said, if I were to create a business plan today, I wouldn't go for that. Now, you have a land, you're trying to make the most of it, but eventually it's not going to be magic. So I think we need to look at, structurally speaking, as you're saying, other possible. Today I talk to farmers, sorry, I'm going to go in a bit of Hindi, but it's like, I've had this told to me, जो सबसे कम अक्लमंद है उसको यहाँ रखते हैं, दो जो अक्ल वाले बेटे हैं उनको शहर में भेजा है, वो वॉचमैन का नौकरी करेगा, staying in a 10 by 10 place. He would love to go back home, but other than farming, there is no other alternative for him to do anything else. So I think these are also issues structurally that, for example, we've been now looking into in terms, now we're talking about fair pricing, we are skirting very close to issues of livelihood. And I think that's the whole point, that eventually if we expect only that farm or that supply chain or that brand and that consumer to take care of all the farmers' needs, it may not always be possible for every crop. So that's the other structural bit I feel that we should now start exploring very realistically. It's almost become a taboo topic not to talk, that no, how can you talk about smallholder farmers doing anything else? And the limit of it is, okay, he can grow another crop, or he should start tending to cattle and do that cattle farming. But I think there are other avenues for farmers also to as in an urban city, and husband and wife both work and generate income. So that's just one more thing that I wanted to add to that structure.
So just to add to that again, so one of the things which we really talk about is livelihoods with farmers, and we always say that a farmer should have at least 5 income streams, right? That gives him resilience, because not every income stream will go up and down at the same time. That's one of it, and that could also be job income, it could be different types of crops, and also comes from the landscape approach which we talk about. The two, and that's another structural change which we were wanting to try and bring out, is that when we create programs or we create any association, we bring in partners from different crops also, right? And that is exactly what Amit is also saying, right? So it's, and that's also about bringing companies in. So there's a textile company, but there's also a company which is buying wheat from the same farmer. And that then gives him more avenues to make happen. So I think the landscape approach, and incidentally, the government of India is actually, we are in partnership with them to put the landscape approach into their way of thinking. So the government at policy level is certainly thinking differently. It takes time to implement it.
Actually, that was going to be my question to you. When you said about industry participation, my question to you was exactly that. Do you see industry for alternate crops, which you answered? Because cotton is largely a seasonal crop. The other thing I want to quickly, I also wanted to check with both of you is, do you see a need for participation also from the textile industry, larger participation from the value chain, in this? Or do you see between policy and or the industry that you mentioned for other crops and allied industries, will that be adequate?
Yeah, no, I think there's definitely a space for everybody to. And let me give an example of how I think in the business he is in, right? And in the value chain from, say, between the ginner to the time it reaches the brand, there are efficiencies there which can be improved. It's still not been looked at closely. Individual associations are looking at it, but when you look at the whole value chain, there are efficiencies there. How can we harness that efficiency? How do we reduce costs there? And that's where, again, coming back to the shared value, the whole supply chain, because that takes into account cost at every level. It's not just cost at the farmer level, it's also cost at anybody who puts up in industry is also investing. There's a cost of capital there, there's working capital in there. So you really need to take all that into account. And I think that's where industry change will happen, is when you really bring all that together. And to me, the key one there is transparency, which is not there today. And that's reality of life, not just in textile. I can tell you there is no transparency in the business value chain in almost every field of business.
I'm going to restrict my answer to textiles because that's what I know. I think for sure. Just to give you an example, right? Where does organic cotton sit? With the Commerce Ministry. Not with textiles, not with agri. The fact is, and that's a reflection of the industry's thinking. I think the industry thinks that for us, ginning is the starting point. All the rest is then agriculture. That doesn't really is part of textiles. If you look at how standards are also set, there is a farm level standard and then there is a textile standard. So I think there is this distance. I always wonder, how many farmers have actually visited a spinning mill or seen we talk about contamination. How many farmers have actually gone and seen the effects of contamination in a spinning mill and what detriment it can do? So there is, of course, it's challenging because there are millions of farmers in India and there are a few textile players. It's not easy. But again, do I think that the textile industry should invest a lot more in their raw material and the people who grow that raw material? I think for sure there is a lot of space. Should they be pushing their respective ministries to take that upon more? 100%. I think there is a lot of scope to do that. And I really hope, I think the sentiment is there, but often in daily business, the supply chain often forgets where it all starts. And I think that definitely can change.
So Naveen, from your point of view, you see your program, there are, besides the cotton programs you run, you also run a lot of donor funding. Do you see an industry or a market appetite for raw material and crops from that? I mean, do you see an interest from that level, or what are the levers that they'd be interested in?
No, I think brands are definitely interested, either because of their own principles or because of government regulations. There is a lot of focus on sustainability. So interest is there. Of course, brands are and downward supply chain partners are also interested. I think, as he said, we are not able to integrate till the farm level. So everyone is disintegrated, everyone is thinking in their own worlds. So if we are able to somehow integrate everything, and if it works very transparently, seamlessly, till the farm level, then I think, and this will happen only if there is a long-term thinking. It cannot happen in 1 season or 2 seasons because we are still in trying phase. What will work, what will not work. So if you are committed to this agenda, then it can definitely happen if all the partners in the supply chain, we come together, we create a system, we commit ourselves for at least 10 years that we will make this happen at any cost. Then it will happen. I think I think we should not forget government. Government has an important role to convene everyone. So if farmers are not able to get premiums, while brands has transferred the premiums, then government also has the role to see that where that premium is gone. So, and government is, by the way, spending a lot of money on, let us say, there is a national mission on natural farming. So government is anyway committed to a sustainable way of farming. They will be putting a lot of budgets in that. So that can also be integrated. So if government is putting up a sizable amount of money in natural farming mission, those clusters can be picked up by the industry partners, and sourcing can be done from there, because then that cost is taken care by government, the extension cost with the farmers. So I think we need to bring in everyone, right from government to farmers to brands to all other players in between.
So on that note, I'm just going to pose a final question to you all. Looking at how you've shared your perspectives, and I'd say let's look at it forward, with a forward-looking point of view. Imagine we are at Bharat Techs 5 years from now, and we've talked about this structural, investments, as well as this non-linear models of sourcing, as well as different pockets and clusters. If one thing had to change from your point of view, 5 years out, looking outside to in, where can we imagine, where we're talking about farmers' livelihoods are more secure, pricing is more transparent, certification is more credible, value is more equitably distributed across the supply chain, what would need to change? And whose responsibility, what's the first trigger to make it happen? I can start with you, Danik.
I mean, there's many flying pieces, right? I think it has so many layers, so I think it's also difficult to just pinpoint one thing. But I think for us brands, it's just important that we can demonstrate impact. Because if we're talking investments and brands making investments, it needs to be linked to business value. And if that business value is there, then there's a lot of money to be invested. That, I don't think money is the problem. It's more how does that money reach the right people in the value chain. So yeah, if something needs to change, then that is what needs to change.
Thanks. On that note to you, Naveen.
So, one or two specific things I would like to see is, one is really long-term commitments. So if everyone in the value chain, if we sign long-term contracts rather than just year on year thinking that this season this is the demand, this will be the pricing, rather than that there can be a general commitment for, let us say, 10 years, that these are the farmers, this is the cluster from where sustainable sourcing will happen, and we will continue to invest in that cluster year after year till we make it happen. So I think long-term commitment is very much important. Second is predictability for farmers. So if they are doing sustainable practices, rather than just depending on certificates, if we depend on outcomes, real outcomes on ground, that will be really, really big change. If there can be ways of measuring, let us say, soil health, carbon sequestration, water efficiency, diversity, and farmers are paid based on outcomes on the ground rather than just their name is figuring in a certificate. So that can be, I think, second big change which we may look at. Third, I would like to see the integration between government natural farming program and what we are doing with the industry partners. So there can be real integration. So agriculture ministry, textile, commerce, NGOs, everyone can come together.
Thanks for that. Amit, your words.
So I think Danik and Naveen already covered quite a bit. If I had a 5-year magic wand that I wanted to see, I would love to see kind of a greater focus on tier 4 to the consumer. So I would love brand campaigns to not just show Indian farmers wearing colorful clothes and carrying cotton. I have a poster like that in my stall. But also kind of make it more transparent, as Jagit was saying about cost. What does it actually cost for a farmer to grow cotton? Because I think eventually, to me, we can put this gun on the brand's head. But let's face it, eventually there is human nature. Everybody is here to also maximize profits, but eventually that comes from the consumer. And I think the consumer eventually has to be made more aware of what the real cost of a product is. Now, what I'm really hoping is that it's never going to happen if we expect 4 or 5 or 10 brands to do this, because that's not going to be enough. That at some point there is a collective, and I've tried this and somehow I'm never able to get brands on the same page, where there's a collective campaign to show more transparency. I love non-profits, but sometimes they come from a perspective which is often, oh, these are the bad guys, they are the evil ones and all of that. I would rather take a positive side to it and say, this is what the real cost is, this is what you should be paying. If you were to pay that, then, and of course, then all the other things like Danik said, how transparently it's distributed, that's where organizations like OCA come into play for sure. But there has to be a starting point in a change in narrative from the consumer side. This narrative that we build that sustainable costs the same as conventional is, pardon my French, but so bullshit that I think this needs to change a lot. And I think that's something I'm really hoping, that we are talking more hard numbers out there with consumers. So maybe not at Bharat Techs alone, but also in all the fairs around the world. I hope that happens. Of course, along with all the things that Danik and Naveen said.
5 years down the line, I'd like to see here 2 farmers sitting and telling the story of how programs which are being put on ground have helped them become resilient, improve yields, and improve livelihoods for them. And brands sitting with them, and not the rest of us, who are proud to be connected directly to those farmers.
Very well said. Thank you for that. On that note, I'm wondering, do we have time for questions? Can we take one or two questions? One question, I'm being told by our moderator. Yeah.
Thanks for the opportunity and good afternoon to one and all. Fantastic session, I think very diverse, divergent and richly experienced people, you know. And I'm feeling enriched in 50 minutes. I think the intelligent quotient and knowledge quotient has just gone like this, you know. The question I need to ask is that I read somewhere that sustainability is incomplete without economic sustainability. And I want to build the point in the concluding note. Amit ji said that the preamble, we are sitting on Bharat Text, you know, where our Honorable Prime Minister started it with the mantra 5Fs, farm to fashion, you know. So I was wondering, textile is perhaps one of the largest supply chain. This textile value chain, everybody wants to maximize, starting from farmer to fashion. But the fallacy is the consumer, which is the cause of this entire business chain, you know. She is not ready to pay extra even one single penny for sustainability, you know. And sustainability is a proven load factor. I'm sure that economics proves it. And the second thing is that we are, through the hard data we have been seeing, there has been a deflation rather. The apparel merchandise value over the years has almost gone down if we try to put that index of that, you know, inflation on that. So the entire panel, anyone can answer, where is it leading us to? When the eventually payment, it is not been paid, how will it be rewarding for the entire supply chain, especially when Jagjeet ji says that 50% extra do up farmers ko? Thank you.
So I'll answer it very simply, right? What enables businesses and economy to go up, right? And let's take India as an example. 50% of our population is connected to farming. That 50% is at poverty line or below, right? And if we do not give them enough money in their pocket to be able to spend, our economy is not going to go up. So for things to move up, we really, as a country, we really need to look at our bottom 50% and see how do their livelihoods improve. Which means that yes, consumers will have to pay more, there is no doubt about it, but that's all of us, right? Consumers is nobody else. I'm a consumer, you are a consumer. If the two of us are not going to pay more, that change is not going to happen, right? So I think that's the key for me to see how does economy move. Economy moves when the bottom half of the economy moves up. And it's a great cycle because as that happens, everybody in the value chain really gets more money. If more people spend more money, there's more to happen and there's more sharing which happens. So I think that's what, and that's really what the Prime Minister is all talking about. He's always talking about sabka vikas, sabka this, right? That's where it is. And businesses need to lead it, right? Because they are the winds of change. They are the ones who can make it happen. They are the ones who can take the story to the consumer, very much like Amit said. So we are all part of it. So let's not expect others to do it. I think all of us need to start looking and thinking that way.
If I can just add to that, I think there are small ways, right? So for example, slow fashion instead of fast fashion. If a consumer has a fixed wallet, I understand that. You can't change that overnight. But if you paid more money per garment, the supply chain is still happy, right? Every person in the value chain gets more, right? But the volume goes down. And that's a paradigm somehow we have just moved away from. When I talk to traders also in my industry, cotton traders, everybody's talking about turnover. You know, how many bales did I sell? How many tons did I sell? Eventually what matters is what value did you derive from that sale. So at some point where I'm hoping, and again this is a hope, because that's all we can do, is that the newer generation is thinking about these things more in terms of value rather than quantity. And change is happening. I don't want to leave this on a note that sounds very pessimistic. I think change is coming. To some extent, you know, it's an evolution again. And I think the younger generation, when I talk to them, when I talk to my daughter, she thinks very differently than the way we thought. So I think change is happening, but yes, those are the kind of things we'll have to look at, again, where mindset shifts. That I don't value eventually as a business, I value by how much profit I make, not by how much top line I'm making. But that's the kind of thinking change I think that can be realistic and yet give everyone more value across the supply chain.
I think I'll just ask the brand in the room to also answer that question, to say what really motivates them to go for sustainable and organic materials, pay higher for them. Do you have a consumer that actually understands and buys that? And what keeps you from, I mean, what's helping you give these long-term commitments and stay on this cause as well?
Yeah, what I would also like to point out next to this is that linking it back to the traceability and transparency, right? Like, we have been paying extremely high prices for more sustainable products. When we started diving deeper into this value chain and when we started investing at tier 4, we actually found out that all of that premium, or like that higher price that we paid, that was lost at the spinning mill, that was lost at the weaving stage, you know, or maybe that was the profit that went into the ginner's pockets. It didn't end up with the farmer. So that's where it already goes wrong. I mean, we are willing to invest. We also have customers willing to pay extra. We do see that if we convert a pair of chinos from conventional to a more sustainable product, that sales are going up. That is not the problem. That's really not the problem. The problem is to make this scalable and to make sure that every tier level actually knows their role and takes that seriously. Because it's, yes, we're all in this, we're all running a business, but we should not, let me phrase it differently, it should become the new normal, you know, it should not be the niche that is costing extra. And I think that is where the tipping point where we need to be and where we...
Please, go ahead. You can end this for us, yeah.
Now, I think the irony of this sector is when a consumer buys organic food, they are very clear that it is going to give them health benefits because they are directly consuming it. And the benefit is very much personal. Here, the benefit is to the environment and to the farmer, which are far away from the consumers. So that is where we need, I think, very innovative methods to make them visualize that what exactly happens at the farm level or with the farmers who are growing this cotton with sustainable practices. I think a lot more investment is required in that kind of visualization. That only, I think, more and more consumers will consider this as the mainstream rather than a niche.
So I think on that note, it will be data to drive impact and impact to drive investment. If we were to say that, I think that's what the future looks like. We do have a very committed Gen Z. We do have a very committed demand from the sector. So I think it's more about data driving investment decision and data communicating that impact that does what it does for the larger society and environment at large. With that, thank you, panelists. Thank you for your inputs and for your words of wisdom. Thank you for a great audience. Thank you all. Thanks.